A guy by the name of Jimmy, for a number of years, wanted nothing more than to be Jewish. Just wanted to be Jewish. And it was explained to him everything that had to be done in order for him to be Jewish. And so he studies for a couple of years. He takes this very seriously, studying for a couple of years, and he's bringing Jewish practices into his own life. And the more he practices, the more enriched he feels. And he knows this was the right decision for him. It just fits. And now he's ready to go and sit before the Beit Din, the rabbinic tribunal of 3 judges who will decide whether he is truly fit and ready to become a Jew. And he also remembers something that he had somehow repressed all this time. Now it comes to him. He's got to be circumcised. And as you can imagine, as much as he loved Judaism, it made him pretty nervous. So he figured he'll talk to a friend of his, a Jewish guy. He says, Moish. He says, Moish, what can you tell me about being circumcised? Moish said, I was walking in a year and a half. I vividly recall a Talmud class in my second year of rabbinical school. The issue at hand may seem a bit odd, but surely in keeping with today's Torah reading, including the circumcision of Isaac at 8 days and Abraham at the age of 90. Ouch. So in class, we were discussing the issue of circumcision, but it was really part of a larger issue in the Talmud. What happens if a male who wants to be Jewish, but for whatever physical reasons could not be circumcised? Our Talmud teacher, an Orthodox rabbi, Rabbi Cohen, and also a retired colonel who served as chaplain for a number of years, he played by the rules, and he was well satisfied by the Talmud's position. If the person couldn't be circumcised, he couldn't be a Jew. That's the rule, that's the law, that's it. But not one member of the class concurred with Rabbi Cohen. Some were offended by the Talmud's position here. I'm sure you know the name Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan. Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan was a professor for over 50 years at the Jewish Theological Seminary of America, training generations of upcoming conservative rabbis. And he was the founder of Reconstructionist Judaism. And he often said, halakha, law, Jewish law, has a vote, but not a veto. It's a central part of Reconstructionist thinking. Halakha, Jewish law, has a vote, but not a veto. And for those of us studying at the RRC, the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, our Judaism would involve a synthesis of holy texts and a spirit of humanism. We would seriously look into the books, but not let it blind us to the emotions, the welfare, the needs of the individuals we are serving. I share this with you today because it represents my Judaism. It represents my rabbinic approach. It shows how I think and how I do Jewish. One eye on the sacred texts, and one eye focused on that person, before me, and focusing with a sense of empathy above all else. And then my Judaism informs me how I look at the world in general, how I look at the world around me. Judaism informs how I deal with contemporary issues. When I speak about contemporary social justice issues from the Bima, because Judaism has something profound to say about gun violence in America, climate change. What are we doing to God's earth? It's not our earth. What are we doing to God's earth? Racial justice. God created us all to be equal. At one point in the prophets, the prophet says to us, he says to Israel, you think you're any better than the Ethiopians? And Judaism has much to teach us about contemporary medical ethics. These are Jewish religious questions. Medical ethics. Contemporary medical ethics. Abortion has been one of the most pressing social issues since this past June, and even a few months before that, when the leak of the upcoming decision came out. And at the heart of the debate is, when does life begin? When does life begin? One Jewish mother answered, life begins when you get your MD. A fertilized egg on the 5th or 6th day becomes a collection of cells. 16 cells, 32 cells, 64 cells. It's called a blastocyst. The blastocyst grows and matures and becomes an embryo. And we all know that some fellow Americans believe deeply that this is human life with a soul. 16 cells, 32 cells, 64 cells, a human life with a soul. But Judaism does not count a fertilized egg or a collection of cells as a human being. In fact, the Talmud here, rightly so, in Aramaic, calls anything before 40 days since conception, anything below 40 days, the Talmud calls it Maya Ba'alma. It's just water in the world. So it's the water in the world. It's really nothing yet. It's not a person. It's not a human being. Doesn't have a soul like, people have. It's not a human life. I don't know if you remember this, but this stays with me all the time. In the summer before 9/11, that same summer, before 9/11, there was an issue of whether the president would approve funding, federal funding, for stem cell research. Do you recall this? Stem cell research. Why do they need federal funding? Anything that is great that happens, GPS, the internet. Here, private funding isn't enough. You need to have the federal government behind it for the research to happen. And these stem cells, they come from the blastocyst, or the embryo, and they are what is known as pluripotent. They can be urged to become, they're amazing, any part of the body. They can become liver cells, or kidney cells, or heart cells. And you just think about the kind of illnesses and diseases that could be cured if the research went forward. They were talking about all the things that could happen with Parkinson's disease and people that are paralyzed, how these cells could regenerate and regrow and the people could come back to life. So here, this doesn't happen often, almost never happens. Rabbis of the four main movements of Judaism wrote a letter to the president, which is to say, they all agreed on the issue. They wrote, "Dear Mr. President, in your wisdom, we together, the rabbinic leaders of the United States of America Jewish community, we hope you will ultimately decide in favor of the stem cell research because of the lives it can potentially save along the way." The president at that time should have said to himself, "These Jews agree on something? Are you kidding me? Four movements, Orthodox, Reform, Reconstruction, and Conservative, they agree, I better go their way." But that's not what happened, because there were many more religious voices that were talking into his other ear. They told the president they could not support research on these embryos. You know where the embryos were at that time? They were frozen embryos. You know how it all works, right? And some of those frozen embryos would be implanted into a woman's womb, but most of those frozen embryos, what would happen to them? They would be discarded. But they were human life with a soul, these other religious voices told them. You can't take a soul and a human being and just do research on them. And let me just interject. Just do research on them to heal diseases of people that are actually alive, walking and talking and loving and loved, and have already made contributions to society. Well, here we are, how many years later? We can only dream about what could have come about today had the government supported research using these embryonic stem cells. Then the embryo grows a little more and becomes a fetus. I view a fetus as something very, very precious. A fetus, very, very precious. In less than 9 months, it can be a little baby that you can hold in your arms and love. I call that very precious because of what it can be. But as to what it is today, our Torah and Judaism does not give that fetus the same status of human life outside of the womb. Until the baby's head is outside of the womb, if that precious potential life threatens the life of the mother, Judaism says we save the mother. We save life, not potential life. And the legal language that Judaism uses is that potential life is called a rodef. A rodef means a pursuer. If you see one guy running after another guy wanting to kill him, the guy running, wanting to kill, is a rodef. If that little baby-to-be is threatening the mother's life, it's a rodef. In Judaism, the life of the mother comes first. So, you want more examples of this? Unfortunately, they're too readily available. When a woman is, God forbid, raped, it has a profound psychological impact that can last a lifetime and manifest itself in so many different kinds of painful ways. How much more so a child who is raped, God forbid. And how much more so, God forbid again, if that child child becomes pregnant. And we followed this story this summer. The story of a 10-year-old child who became pregnant in Ohio. And as soon as the Supreme Court did what the Supreme Court did, there was what was called the trigger law from Ohio. A lot of these trigger laws go back over 100 years. And immediately it said, no abortions and no exemptions. I don't know what book they had one eye on, but there was no one with an ounce of empathy looking at this 10-year-old child. What are the chances of that child living a normal, healthy life? She's being condemned. Well, she couldn't get the abortion in Ohio. If a doctor would have done it, the doctor would have been prosecuted for murder. So she was able to go to Indiana. She had a legal abortion, but she couldn't go to Indiana today because Indiana passed the law. So she'd have to go farther west to Illinois or farther east to Pennsylvania. You all know what amniocentesis is? Yeah. Do you know when amniocentesis can be done? It can be done around 13 to 15 weeks. And one of the things that comes out of amniocentesis is what kind of defects, horrible defects the baby might have. Well, if there's a law that says up until 15 weeks, doesn't matter what the amniocentesis says, because your time's up, basically. Your time's up. It's too late in many states. Tay-Sachs disease, a genetic disorder primarily of Ashkenazic Jews, so many of us, can be diagnosed between 10 and 13 weeks. And a Tay-Sachs baby develops on schedule perfectly fine for the first 3 to 6 months. Then within months to a few years, the baby loses the ability to see, the ability to hear, and the ability to move. By age 2, most start having seizures. Children with the conditions do not usually live more than 5 years. But a fetus with this genetic disorder is condemned to a life of misery and pain, and so too are the parents. Can you imagine as a parent, God forbid, hearing that? So these laws going into effect after the Supreme Court decision and the laws passed by individual states, they ignore this woman and her husband's pain and anguish. It just doesn't matter. You don't matter. Women, you don't matter. Fathers-to-be, you don't matter. After the Dobbs versus Jackson decision, the conservative movement sent out this statement. It says, the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards, which is the conservative movement, our movement, conservative Masorti movement, it's the committee of leading halachic thinkers, legal Jewish thinkers, and they gave this statement. The Committee on Jewish Law and Standards of the Rabbinical Assembly of the Conservative Masorti Movement has affirmed the right of a pregnant person to choose an abortion in cases where continuation of a pregnancy might cause severe physical or psychological harm, or where the fetus is judged by competent medical opinion as severely defective. The position is based on our members' understanding of relevant biblical and rabbinic sources, as well as tshuvot, modern rabbinic responsa. Jewish tradition, they wrote, cherishes the sanctity of life, including the potential of life during pregnancy, but does not believe that personhood and human rights begins with conception, but rather with birth. You know that the present supermajority on the Supreme Court has ruled on issues of religious liberty a number of times? And I don't know of any exceptions, maybe you do, but if there is an exception, then it's almost without exception, or maybe without exception, that the present Supreme Court always decides on the side of religious liberty. Can a coach pray on the 50-yard line after a game? Yes, the Supreme Court says it's his religious liberty. Always on the side of religious freedom. Well, dear Supreme Court supermajority, these decisions and laws deprive us of our religious freedoms. As Jews, we know we're only a small minority. You can overlook us. But that's not the way America has operated in all of our years. Our religion does not see the fetus as a human being. Our religion does not see the fetus as having a soul. Abortion is not murder in Jewish eyes. But exponentially more important, it deprives young women whose lives will be irrevocably damaged to make decisions about their lives. It doesn't permit them to make decisions about their own lives, about their own bodies, about their own future. So I raise the question to you, dear friends, where can people find, or where can we find people who have a conscience, a respect for life, the sanctity of life, and see clearly the realities of the trauma women will be forced to endure? Do they exist anywhere? Look no farther than the citizens of the state of Kentucky. Many of them pro-life, who would not vote for draconian laws that have no empathy for the women who are in pain and suffering. At the same time, there are people who are pro-choice, who are in favor of certain limitations on what might be called abortion on demand. So I began with a discussion of whether a potential Jew by choice can become Jewish if he has not and cannot physically undergo a circumcision. And I suggest in that case that we look at the law with one eye and we look at that human being with the other eye, with compassion and with empathy. Yes, dear friend Jimmy, you can become Jewish. We want you. We see you. Our heart is with you. You will enrich the Jewish people. We will be enriched because of you. The books don't always have it right. Prior generations didn't always get it right. There are plenty examples of even our founding fathers didn't always get it right, that's for sure. So dear friends, now it is our time. And I say to you today, pass the word on. It is our responsibility, men and women. Now it is our responsibility and our turn to make the decisions that count in our language as tikkun olam, of repairing, of healing a broken world. And let each of us take that seriously, and let each of us take on that responsibility and express that responsibility wherever and whenever we can. Because you and I together, we can make this world, our country, our Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, our community. We can make it a better place. Amen. So listen, I appreciate the almost round of applause. But you know what's been happening lately? Lately at bar and bat mitzvahs, the kid gives his first Devar Torah. And after the bar mitzvah, the bat mitzvah is over, people start applauding, and even give the kid a standing ovation. And I say to myself, I've been doing this for 45 years. People hardly ever applaud, never got a standing ovation. One Devar Torah, look what happens. And you know what? I am so very proud of that young person. So very proud. Because, I see the kids growing up, but when I sit and work with them on their Devar Torah, I find out how really smart and insightful and thoughtful they are. They deserve the round of applause. They deserve the standing ovation. We turn now in our Machzor to page 279, the Chazan's prayer.